My name is Colm O'Mallode. I'm a business development executive with Club Force, and I'm also responsible for partnerships that we're putting in place for the company. Secondly, I hope everyone is safe and well. I hope Storm Barra hasn't treated anyone too badly. I know Sean is up in Donegal there. He might have had an issue with it, but he's all safe and well. We'll get the speakers will introduce themselves later on, but just quickly from our end. So I'm sure most of you have heard of Club Force and maybe know what Club Force do. But there might be some people who've just tuned in through seeing that the webinar was on. So just to give you a brief overview on what we do member management and registration software for local level GAA clubs, and we also do fundraising technology as well, primarily local lottery, but we also do other fundraising events as well. We also allow clubs to communicate with their members through newsletters, through a mobile app for training notifications, etc. So a full CRM system, fundraising and membership system for GAA clubs. If anyone wants to hear any more information, you can check out our website at clubforce.com or get in touch with any one of the team. But I suppose all of our services are generally focused on helping volunteers, helping clubs perform, primarily off the field. And we were discussing ways how else can we deliver value to Club Force clubs, and we were discussing internally what can we do to help maybe clubs in their performance on the field. And we put together, we sought out some experts in this area, and the partners were Club Stat Sports and Output Sports, the people who will be speaking here tonight. So the three companies, three Irish tech companies, it's a nice story coming together: Output Sports, Stat Sports, and Club Force. And just to give you the agenda quickly of what's going on, that was the quick intro from myself. I'll be handing over to Marty Clark, who a lot of people will have heard of. Marty, former professional Aussie Rules player, all-star with Down and Down under 20s coach at the moment. Conor Clancy is a sales executive with Stat Sports. He'll be talking through some of the technology as well. Delighted to have Gary Flannery on, who's the head of performance at Roscommon GAA and coach at St. Bridget's in Roscommon as well. Sean Mc Veigh from Output Sports, senior sports scientist with Output Sports. He's going to be having a chat with Barry McEntee, Barry of McEntee Performance Physio. Barry's well renowned and well regarded in GAA circles, and in particular he was the physio for the successful Meath GAA Ladies All-Ireland winning champions this year. So we'll be talking through some examples of how he used Output Sports technology, and then we're going to finally touch on some Club Force customer partner benefits at the end. And if anyone has a question, we'll open up the questions at the end if anyone has any good questions they want to ask any of the panelists. So because we're a little bit late going, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Marty Clark, and I'm just going to turn off, I'm going to assign the presenting here over to Conor. So thanks very much, folks, and I'll be dipping in now throughout the webinar.
Thanks, Colm. That's great. Yeah, so let's get into it. Myself and Conor Clancy are here to represent Stat Sports for this segment of the webinar. It's great to be here, and thanks for everyone who's made the effort to join. Just a little bit on myself. I play for Down. I also had 6 years down in Melbourne playing for Collingwood in the AFL, and I've been at Stat Sports for over 3 years now. I suppose a little bit about my experience with GPS technology as a player. It was still quite primitive. A lot of practitioners will know that. When I was still in the AFL around 2012, 2013, 2014, but the fact that we were able to get data, physical data back then was really good for me as a player. A lot of the Irish men and women that go down to the AFL and AFLW, their main strength is their running capacity in many ways, and for this data to finally be able to be measured and showcased to coaches, to teammates, it really was significant. Particularly for me, I was able to change positions. I matched up on some different opponents that potentially the coaches had thought I might not have been able to previously. So it was a powerful tool even back then, but with advances, it's gone completely to the next level now. But for me, it was a nice fit to come back home and work for such a high quality company. Little bit of background on Stat Sports, founded in 2008 by two Louth men, Sean O'Connor and Alan Clark. Really has exploded in recent years, 150 employees. We've offices, as I said, in Newry, Chicago, Sydney, Doha, China and India as well. Really working with some of the elite teams up and completely across the globe, basketball, American football, soccer, rugby, you name it. It's just such an exciting place to work. But I suppose my most significant contribution was 2018. I hadn't long started the company, and a number of people who've been working in Stat Sports. It was a little bit of a, I suppose, something that was bugging us. We only had 5 GAA inter-county teams across the board at that stage. So we sort of had a bit of a think tank, got together some of the key stakeholders within the company, sports science practitioners that were using our devices, other teams, representatives as to why we couldn't quite get more GAA partners as it was. And thankfully, we were able to come up with a package that had the most appropriate hardware, software. The on-site sports science support was a very important thing as well, getting Stat Sports sports scientists out to these counties to help facilitate and maximise that return on investment. But we're very proud now. We've moved from that 3 years ago to 33 inter-county teams across all codes. I use a combination of our Pro Series and our Apex Team Series systems, and we've had a lot of success. A lot of the last 4 in all codes across the board, we have those teams. We've had some great success too, Sam Maguire Cups, Liam McCarthy Cups as well. So it has been really, really good. And we also have a number of teams in the women's codes as well. And it's expanding. You can see some brilliant crests there. I apologize if your county people are listening isn't on there. We either don't have you on board yet, or we just didn't have space. But you know, some top GAA brands there that we're super proud to work with the best athletes on the island of Ireland. And of course, this picture was pretty good for Stat Sports back in the summer. We got one of the Tyrone lads to rip the jersey of David Moran, and we got a bit of exposure, which was fantastic. It got people asking questions. Unfortunately for Kerry, Tyrone went on to win that one, but it was good for the company. You know, we saw at the Euros as well with Ukraine when they scored the goal to get our vest out. And then this was an infamous photo from a few years previous, perhaps when the recognition for GPS tracking wasn't quite where it's at now. You can just see on Dean Rock's standing foot there, Lee Higgins' GPS device. It didn't deter Dean from kicking that one, but it got a bit of publicity for us back then. A lot of people were asking, oh, that's the bulge on the back of the jersey. So certainly for us as a company to be working with the best, with the elite teams across Ireland, it's a big thing for us. However, Conor Clancy is going to talk now about how the company have evolved to try and offer a refined system to club players up and down the country at grassroots level, so they can also show their coaches, like I was able to in the AFL. Do you know what? I'm running more than you think. I'm producing, you know, physical data that perhaps is a little bit surprising, and that's something that we're very proud of. And I'll hand over to Conor now to take you through our Apex Coach Series, and I thank everyone for their time to listening from me.
Thanks very much, Marty. Look, a fantastic kind of an insight, I suppose, into both obviously how you benefit from the GPS technology yourself as a player, but I suppose as well from a Stat Sports point of view, how the kind of GPS technology has gone from strength to strength kind of over the last number of years when it comes to the actual elite standard in inter-county hurling and Gaelic football. But what I suppose, as Marty touched on, what I'm going to turn my attention to now, and I suppose why we're here this evening, is how we've actually tried to kind of get into the club market, I suppose, over the last 2 years. You know, we've been lucky enough to kind of get involved and introduce partnerships with GAA clubs across all 4 codes again, in every county in the country now. You know, so we're absolutely really proud of that, and to be able to actually give back to the local grassroots clubs is a massive thing for us, and something that we're really proud of. I suppose the actual system that's made us, kind of allowed us to do that, is the Apex Coach Series system. So the Coach Series system was basically developed in 2019 with grassroots teams in mind, in terms of ease of use and kind of, I suppose, how easy it is to use for coaches and players at all levels, but at the same time, of course, from a pricing perspective as well. You know, so our kind of main key targets when we launched this at the start of 2020 was to make it accessible for coaches and players and clubs kind of across the board, you know, at every level and across all codes. You know, luckily enough, we've had great feedback over the last 2 years, you know, despite the obvious barriers there over the last 2 years that we've all had to kind of get over. We've had massively good feedback from clubs, and I suppose even during the infamous kind of individual training kind of periods during COVID, what this system allowed coaches and players to do was to track their obviously load throughout those individual training periods, so that the coaches could see that data coming through from the players as well. So the system itself, I suppose, just to go into a little bit more detail on how it works for kind of clubs and you know, how players and coaches utilize it on a daily basis, is that basically the way it works is it works off 2 key applications. So I'm going to send out a little bit of a video afterwards and some information afterwards about it, but just to touch on it briefly, the way that clubs use it is kind of with the Apex Athlete Series app and the Apex Coach Series app. So the Apex Athlete Series app is the player application, which a player will have on their smartphone. So the way it works for a player then, it is quite an individual solution. So the way that the player can use it is that they have their GPS unit kind of synced up to their phone, and from there, they'll be able to download their sessions and their training and their games directly after their sessions and games, and they get their physical metrics and their load straight back into the phone, so that they're able to track their progress kind of over a season and obviously over a number of seasons. But the actual, I suppose, the real kind of gem in the crown of this system is the Apex Coach Series app. So the Coach Series app allows the coach, I suppose, to tie everything together. So if they have a number of players using these GPS units on the team, you know, they get to kind of see all of the data coming through directly after a session or after a game. So as I mentioned, the player will download the session directly onto their phone, and that automatically pops across to the coaching staff on that Coach Series app. So the Coach Series application itself is kind of available on tablets and iPads, but as well as that on a web version on a laptop or a PC as well. What that does obviously is allows coaches straight away, you know, when they get home in the car or whatever after a session or after a game, is to open up this and see every player's data for that game. Obviously with the physical metrics being a key part of and a key strength of ours, but what we've tried to do over the last couple of years as well is to kind of put in some coaching and tactical sides to it as well, so that it's not all, I suppose, the boring numbers that a coach can see. Things like heat maps, things like sprint maps, zonal breakdowns, player comparisons, etc. as well. This is just kind of an overview of how the system is configured at a club. So obviously with the players and the Apex Athlete Series apps being the kind of building blocks, as I said, at the bottom there, with the Apex Coach Series app tying everything together. I suppose a key point again with this system is there's no right or wrong way to use it. There's no right or wrong kind of number of players to use it as a squad. If you have one player on a squad using this, you can use the Coach Series app all the way up to 40 players in a squad. I suppose on that point as well, for a lot of clubs, they'll use it for multiple squads. You're allowed to kind of create as many squads as you want there, and you could have as many coaches kind of viewing this data for free as you want also. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to talk you through a little bit more detail later and send you on some detail, as I said. But what I'm going to do is actually pass you over to Gary Flannery, who has a bit more applied insight on the ground from a GAA club standpoint, but as well through the inter-county standpoint. So that experience in both. So what he's going to do is kind of bring you through, I suppose, the benefits that he's seen on the ground for players and coaches alike.
Cheers, Conor. Thanks very much. So yeah, welcome guys to the webinar. Look, I suppose anyone that knows me, or I'd like to think that players that have worked on teams that I've been with, player welfare is a very important aspect for me as a coach when I'm looking at a team. You know, obviously we're all there trying to win games, but I'm looking to get longevity out of players as well. And I suppose from a mental point, to keep them as mentally healthy as well. And GPS certainly has an area that it can do that. So I just like to make that point before I do get into a little bit more about myself. I suppose my own qualifications, I'm a sports scientist, strength and conditioning coach, and I'm currently doing my sports psychology masters also. My first dip, I guess, into high-end elite sports was working in the High Performance Centre in Pretoria, so HPC. There I would have worked with world champions, Olympic athletes. A couple of names might be familiar or recognisable. Akani Simbine would come fourth in the last Olympics, the Olympics just gone, Tokyo 21. Cornell Fredericks, Commonwealth champion, and LJ Van Ziel. Track and field athletes, obviously, they wouldn't have used GPS systems, but they certainly would have used a range of technology services that would have been available to them. So technology is a part of modern day sports, and when used correctly, it absolutely has its benefits. In Ireland, I would have freelanced for track and field athletes. I would have worked with a number of football and hurling senior club teams in Kilkenny, Laois, currently in Roscommon, and I'm also the current head of performance with Roscommon. So what is my job? Well, I kind of see it as to safely develop all pillars of human performance, be it mental, physical, technical and tactical. And I'm going to speak about those in a little bit more depth and where GPS has its benefits for those. So basically, if we think about physical performance and what is it? Well, work is equal to force by distance, force being mass by acceleration. And if we look at a gym setting, we can easily quantify work and how we improve this work. It's well established. If I'm looking at a deadlift in a hypertrophy phase, for example, well, if it's 150 kg by 4 sets of 10 reps, 70%, you're moving 6,000 kg weight. And that's very clear. I know that's what's been moved, and I know that's what's supposed to be moved, and I know the work has been done. I'm there with the athlete, and it has been recorded, and that's fine. It gets a little bit more difficult when we go to the field. Because it's very difficult to be obviously telling the player, this is the exact amount of work that I want you to do. So GPS, if you like, it's a retrospective tool in some sense that we can use to gather information about the work that has been done and what can be then done with this information. So how do we make this information look like our gym-based example? And has our work got structure, and has our structure got work? So the second last point, how do we make this information look like our gym-based example? Well, we have to, as I said, somehow retrospectively look back at it. If we're doing a conditioning drill and we work 6-8 minute conditioning drills and we look back at that data, has it been done and developed in a way whereby we're not overloading the players, we're correctly periodizing those players throughout a period of weeks and months, and being able to build a platform for us to understand that we are loading at a correct rate and we are unloading when necessary. And has our work got structure, and has our structure got work? What I mean by this is, has our work got structure? So are we structuring our work in terms of working the different energy systems? And has our structure got work? So has that actual structure got the work that we want to get out of it? So it's a good phrase for me that I keep in my mind whenever I'm looking at field-based or gym-based sessions. So if I break down those, if I go into the mental aspect, and I've decided to get into sports psychology myself because I think people grasped that maybe 6-7 years ago that GPS was a huge area in sports, and it was a huge area that we could gain some marginal gains. And really, you know, the sports psychology, it's starting to really come down the track strong, if you like. And I think it's really going to be that next push where we can really see some some not just physical but obvious well-being gains within sport as well. So I've said here that it is accepted that not every session will be an improvement on the last, not every session will be an improvement on the previous session for every player, and that has to be accepted. But what you're looking to do with players is, if they're not improving on the field, is there other aspects of their game that they are improving on? And if there is, well, then they need to be at the peace of mind, I guess, that, okay, look, last season I was kicking 3-4 points a game. This season I'm kicking, kicking 3 points occasionally in some games. And that can very much get in on a player. Whereas if I'm able to show the player, well, actually, look, you're doing this much extra in terms of work around the field. Your sprint distance is up, your top speed is up, your the zones that you're covering is up. If we're able to show through GPS that there are so many areas of your game that you are improving, it is going to be a matter of time for that player to start kicking those 4, 5, 6 points. So it can very much be used in that sense. And that covers that second point there also, I guess. The third point, just to touch on it a little bit more, if the player is doing all the required work and visible improvements can be seen via their GPS data, this positive information can be useful when fed to the player. So just, I guess, a third point on that as well is if the player is hitting all of the areas, all of the sessions that we're being asked them to hit, well, then the ownership, you can take the ownership of their performance back off them a little and say, well, look, you're doing what we're asking you to do. This might be a little on me. I'll visit the work that you've been putting in. I'll visit GPS. I'll visit the output sports technology, for instance. You're doing what I'm asking you to do, so maybe there's something that I need to tweak. And this again is another way of taking a little bit of pressure off the player, in that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and maybe others need to be up in their game, be it management or coaches like myself. So the technical aspect, it's also possible for the GPS to pull areas of the technical pillar and improve upon it. So if a player is working on the technical aspects of his physical performance, be it sprint drills, for example, there should be evidence to support this. So it's probably, if I look at the 4 pillars, the technical one is, I guess, the most difficult area to improve upon with GPS, because obviously we can't assess their technical ability with a football or with a slitter, but I can assess if their actual technical drills, further sprinting, further agility, if this is being constantly improved upon, this should have a wipe off or a rub off on their sprint performance. And as I said at the bottom, a good example here would be max velocity or top speed. And the final pillar that I spoke about, being tactical, well, I guess Marty touched on it really well there. This is going to be obviously one of the strongest aspects to improve upon, along with the physical performance. And the second point being, it's somewhat self-explanatory, I guess, but if we're asking cornerbacks to get up and down the field, and it appears maybe that, say, number 2 is getting to the 45 constantly, but the other cornerback is regularly getting into the opposition square, this can be objectively pointed out. So, okay, many games now are being recorded, but if games aren't being recorded, we're physically able to show that player, well, actually, look, this is how often you are touching this heat map that we're looking for you to hit. This is how often we're asking you to hit that zone, and this is how often you are hitting it, and this is how long you've spent inside the opposition D. There can be no argument, I guess, on that point. It's there for managers and players to see. So it's nice sometimes for a player to be able to see that visual picture of, actually, yeah, now that I can see it like this, I'm not following out the rules in terms of how I'm being asked to. I touched on that on point 3, and I've said there in point 4 as well that although it can be observed on a recording, it's sometimes much more powerful for a player to be able to see it on a single image, as opposed to be flicking through or watching a 70-minute game. Just on the final slide, if I was to sum it up, and it's important, I haven't come on here from Club Force, or I haven't come on here from Stat Sports. The guys have asked me for, I suppose, an unbiased view of Stat Sports or GPS or technology in general. So my view is unbiased. But what I would say is that all objective data is good data. A lot of my work in the past would have been with track and field athletes, and I think track and field athletes, albeit there's a lot more pressure maybe on them sometimes, because if you're a 100-meter sprinter and you go through the 100 meters in 9.98 seconds, that is where you're at. It's not subjective. Nobody can say, well, you're really good, I think you're the best in the world. You are 9.98 and that is it. Whereas obviously field sport athletes, so much is dependent on subjective. Like, I mean, who's the best player in the world? Who's the best cornerback in the country? It's all subjective. Whereas if you can actually give a player objective data, you know what it is, and you know when it's improved or if it's not improving, and it's the simplest that. So all objective data is good data. And that second point, I summed it up earlier. If a player isn't improving on the field, provide them with the information to show them where they are improving. So you've got to, there's 100 aspects in which a player will need to improve. Always be in a position where you can pull out a certain amount of points about their game that they are improving. And GPS can obviously do this. So ensure you have the personnel willing to work on the data if technology is purchased. This for me is the most important point. Don't buy technology if you don't have somebody that's going to use it. This mistake can be made, but there are really, good people in every club, I believe, that really enjoy data. I'm somebody that loves data. So if you are thinking about purchasing data, there's nothing wrong with setting up a small committee that will be able to follow through the process on an annual basis, whereby you're always looking at this data and seeing the benefits and how you can improve going into the future. Final point being, players like to improve, and GPS will improve players once it's utilised correctly. I've come across very, very few field athletes at the top level, or any level really, that one, don't want to improve, and two, don't want to, that want to know, I guess, some areas that they can improve. And you can give them this objective data again with GPS. So look, that's it from me. Quite a lot to cover. I hope some of it made sense. I'll be on for a couple of questions later on if anyone wants to shoot me some questions. I'm going to pass it now back to Sean in Outsport, or Connor's going to come in briefly first.
Perfect. No, really appreciate that, Gary. A class, kind of an applied insight. You know, it's all well and good listening to myself and Marty up on the stat sports side of it, but as Gary said, a perfectly unbiased kind of an opinion there, and perfectly kind of put across in terms of the club and the inter-county side of it. But just to finish off from a stat sports point of view, I'm just going to bring the attendees in at the moment some good news. So we had a bit of a sale period there over the last couple of weeks that just finished up. But what we're going to do, in partnership with Club Force, is kind of extending that discount to everybody that's on and the clubs that are involved in this webinar there this evening. So there's going to be a discount code that's just going to be Club Force, and it can be used to bring that down to that Black Friday sale price in pounds and in euros as well. Obviously, that will be kind of shared alongside the videos and extra information after the webinar. But for now, thanks very much for kind of taking the time to kind of look through the stat sports stuff, and I'm going to pass you back to Colm, who's going to bring you on to the Output Sports guys. Thanks very much.
Connor, that was very informative from Marty and particularly Gary there. We can listen to the stat sports guys all day, but it's great to get that application to county level, to club level as well. We're going to move on quickly to Output Sports. I think this is a nice transition because stat sports is focused on the field performance. Output Sports obviously involves on the field, but it's more measurement of off the field stuff as well. So Sean's going to give an intro as to what is Output Sports, a really innovative company, really excited to get them on board as a partner. He'll have a chat with Barry about his background, how we got to know Output Sports, some of Barry's work with the Meath Ladies Footballers. I'm a Meath man myself, so very proud year to see the girls go on and win the All-Ireland. Fantastic performance, beating the Dubs, of course, in Croke Park. He'll go on to discuss a case study and then touch on some output exercises and metrics so you can see the technology working in practice. So I'm going to hand you over here.
Thanks a million. I suppose, first of all, thanks to the guys at Club Force for putting this webinar together. It's absolutely brilliant, I suppose, to see 3 Irish sports technology companies coming together and providing these sort of educational nights for the likes of GAA clubs across the country. So yeah, as Colin said, my name's Sean Mc Veigh. I'm the Senior Sports Scientist at Output Sports. And I suppose, what is Output Sports and what do we do? So I suppose we're a company that's born out of research. So the lads, before actually forming the company in the back end of 2019, was actually conducted 8 years of research in UCD. And their single goal was to make sports science simple, scalable, and accessible for absolutely everybody. And as you see here on the screen, we're trusted by some of the world's leading coaches and clubs, from the English football team, Leicester Rugby, teams in the English Premier League and across in the States as well, and some of the biggest leagues over there. But not just that, we're trusted and used by some of the top local inter-county squads here in Ireland, such as the Limerick Hurlers, Kilkenny, Derry, and also, as we'll talk about Barry later, the Meath Senior Ladies as well. Beyond that, we're actually used by a lot of clubs around the country as well. So we use our multi-sensor system in setting up within their actual club gyms as well. So the actual output system itself, so we're one sensor which will collect data on over 150 performance tests spanning strength, power, speed, mobility, balance, and a whole range of other different modules. Within a GAA setting, we can actually set up multiple sensors within the actual gym. So if you imagine your actual GAA gym where you've got multiple squat racks, you can station an output sensor at each of those and run through a whole range of testing, or actually just use it internally within your training and monitor the training across the season. This is easily accessible by the coaches as well, so the coaches can access the data in session, or they can actually access it remotely as well, so they don't actually have to be on site with their athletes. As I mentioned, it's a portable device as well, so again, it is primarily used within the gym setting, but can be brought out to the pitch for the likes of your rehabilitation sessions, maybe some of your power and speed stuff that you might want to conduct some data on as well. And again, simple and easy to use. So as we built this system over the last number of years, we built that based off feedback from current users with the goal of making it really simple and easy to use in session, and also allowing you to get instantaneous feedback from that as you drive through it. So I suppose with that, I'm going to bring Barry in. So Barry's going to talk to us about his experiences with the Meath Ladies Footballers this year, and what was an absolutely unbelievable year for them, lifting the All-Ireland. So Barry, I suppose the best place to start might be with an introduction into, I suppose, your work and your interest in sports technology, and how that then led you to come across Output Sports.
Thanks very much, Colin. Thanks to Club Force and yourselves for inviting me on to speak here this evening. So yeah, I suppose I first heard of Output. I was monitoring, I suppose, their progress in the early stages of a startup in UCD Nova, and obviously Brian Caulfield would have been a lecturer of mine in college, was involved, and I suppose that in itself, I suppose, was an endorsement for me in terms of keeping an eye on what was happening as it progressed. So I suppose earlier on at the start of this year, we came on board with yourselves, and it's given us great access to monitoring tools and to be able to test to a level of detail that we wouldn't have had before. So as I said, it's quite diverse in terms of the different aspects that we can monitor and the key performance indicators that we can track over the course of rehab. So I suppose really being able to quantify the information and that in itself allows us to make better decisions, and I suppose it's rather than if we're not measuring it, we're kind of guessing, so the fact that we can measure things, we can know that we're ready to move on to the next stage, and we have that confidence of knowing that the player is ready to push on, to be it running or maybe change of direction, and there's a number of different metrics that we look at there to inform us as to whether that player has the physical readiness or capability to be able to move on. So as a player, I think a lot of players will feel their readiness to progress or return to play is based on the absence of pain, and obviously we know that that's not necessarily a good recipe. So being able to have the information to relay this back to the player and explain to them and talk them through, well, look, we can see here that you're not developing enough power here. We can see that your reactive strength just isn't at the level that it needs to be at here for change in direction. So again, we can guide them a lot more safely, and it also allows us to have engage and explain rather than just trying to eyeball it to an extent. And obviously a lot of what we do is standing back and observing what we're seeing, but being able to back that up with objective data, as Gary mentioned earlier, is really a huge asset for us to have. It also allows us to relay information through to our strength and conditioning coach Eugene as well, with the girls, where we're able to have a conversation, speaking a common language, and working as a team in that backroom team. It makes things a lot more, I suppose, streamlined and straightforward for us and for the players as well.
Yeah,
so,
I suppose. Sorry, Barry. I suppose in terms of the actual day-to-day and the exercises and the metrics that you'd be looking at, could you give us some detail into what you actually be looking at in terms of the actual exercises and how that actually potentially influences the in session you might be doing with I suppose an athlete in a rehab setting?
Yeah, so I suppose if we just take lower limb injuries, which I suppose it would be a lot of what would be seeing in season, and we'll be looking at the likes of counter movement jump, drop jump, monitoring rotational force production as well. Nordic hamstring exercise, looking at the break angle. So this information helps us to, I suppose, just for example, someone looking to break on the breakdown for a drop jump, we're looking at their ground contact time, their flight time, their jump height, and what the reactive strength index is. So again, that, I suppose, gives us the ability to break down. So if we look at that and say, well, we can see here that your ground contact time is too high, you're spending too much time on the ground, we need to improve on that. We can go away, and obviously that will guide us.
What I might do, Barry, is I might run on and do a bit of a demo of the actual system, and we'll see if we can get the audio back and come back into that conversation afterwards. So what I'll do now is I'll actually run through a demo of the system. So I'm just going to share my screen here again. Yep, and just open up the actual output device. So again, we're a single sensor system, as I said before. So with a single sensor, we connect up wirelessly to our host device. So in this case, we're connected to my mobile phone. And you'll see here, I've got the Capture app open, and this is my athlete profile. So again, within the system, each of the athletes within the club will have their own profile, where all of their data is collected and stored, and then the coaches or the athletes themselves can go at a later point and analyze that data. So on our homepage here, you can input weight and height on a daily basis. So maybe if you're working with some of their youth athletes underage, you might want to collect this data. And then we've also got some daily wellness and readiness to train questions here as well. So some subjective stuff that you can input or have the athletes input daily or before a session as well. And then you can track that across a season or a calendar year. And again, the green lines here are the data I just inputted for today against my grey baseline over the last year. To get into our exercise menu, and what you can do actually as a practitioner is set up your testing day at the top here with your favorites. So the athletes will then go through those exercises without actually scrolling through our menu here. And that just makes it easier because we have over 150 exercises currently within the system, and then we put those into different categories then based on what they are. So again, within this you can track balance, barbell velocity, ground contact times, and drive index, so your speed and sprinting type stuff, jumps, so your counter movement jumps, squat jumps. We've got mobility as well, so that's allowing the likes of Barry and other practitioners across the country to get objective measures on joint range of motion. So that might be shoulder health, hip and knee, different ranges of motion you can collect. Again, we can do the Nordic hamstring exercise, which Barry briefly spoke about there. And then we also have the reactive strength index, so all your hopping type tests, slam swings and throws. We actually have a new system in here as well, which is a speed and agility system. So using the camera on my mobile phone here, we're actually able to use that as a timing gate and get some speed testing done with the athletes as well. And then we're also able to collect some stability, strength, endurance, straight pathway stuff at the bottom there. But where it's most commonly used, I suppose, within a GAA setting, I suppose, is within barbell velocity. So I just jump into that module here. You see you've got a range of defined exercises actually in the system. We've also got some of your kind of trap bar jumps and squat bar jumps when you get to the more power phase of the program when you're leading up to the championship phase. If I jump into a back squat, again, we can select the reps that we want to do. We input the weight that's on the bar for the athlete, and then we'll simply just press record, allow the athlete to unrack the bar, and then we'll just move through our set. Okay, and then post set, we're going to get a summary of all of our metrics here as well. So again, you'll see we've got an overall mean power as our main summary metric here, and you notice that's 12% down than the previous set that I did. But if I scroll down, we can look at each individual set here across a range of different metrics. So maybe very interesting for the S&C coach, depending on what adaptations are looking out of that session. From an actual user standpoint as well, you can just click retest, which will take you back into your testing page. But from an actual user point as well, within the gym setting, as I mentioned earlier, you may have this position or stationed at a squat rack within the club gym. Once I go through my set, I might be partnered up with another athlete. I just press quick swap athlete, takes me out here, and we can get a whole team in to do a session or an evening as well, not a problem. From there, I'm just going to jump back out of here and show you a couple of other exercises. So again, if I just scroll down here, we'll go into our jumps. We'll go into bilateral counter movement jumps. So again, one of our most common tests. Again, we place our sensor on our foot, like so, and then we hit record. Hopefully I don't embarrass myself too much here now. We'll go through a jump, and again, you get your instantaneous feedback. You get a percentage whether I'm up or down on my previous test. And again, like before, you can quick swap athlete, go through a range of different, getting a range of different tests done with those athletes. And if you do have more time, you can track that here within our graph, so where you've got all my historical data saved. And if we click on the chart, we can track data across time then as well. So yeah, if anybody is interested in having a demo, please reach through either the guys at Club Force or myself, and we can delve into this in more detail. We also have a 10% offer, like the guys there at Stat Sports did before, in partnership with Club Force. So if people want to go onto our website and go to the shop there, they can use the discount code Club Force 10 for a 10% discount, and that's for all attendees here on the webinar this evening.
We will be sharing some material from both Output and Stat Sports, so we'll be emailing you that after the webinar. Do remember the exclusive offers as well, so you can get in touch with the lads or get in touch with me or any of our staff, and we'll put you in contact with either Sean or Connor from the Output or from the Stat Sports side, and be sure to mention that you're a Club Force customer to get that that good value offer from them. We will open up to questions here, so maybe Rachel, if you can open up the GoToWebinar to questions, if anyone wants to pop in questions for now. I do have a quick question myself for Sean, and that's in relation to the difference between, I actually wanted to ask Barry this one, but I'll ask you this one, the difference between male and female. I know that a lot of research that in all the papers published, etc., would be male dominated. The research should be on male and not so much on female. Has the technology shown that there's a particular way that maybe females should be considered differently, different builds, different muscle structure, etc.? Is there any particular considerations that you've come across in that regard?
I think it's a very interesting space, and I think, as you mentioned there, that the female game is a very under-researched area, and I hopefully with the likes of this sort of technology, which gives practitioners and researchers that objective data to work with, that it will become more commonplace. Obviously, the fact that we're able to collect so much data across so many different fitness components allows us and the practitioners to really kind of delve into that in more detail. And hopefully over time, we'll be able to actually see if there are any significant differences within that. But I think it's a really important point. And Definitely, I think that the range of different exercises within this system will allow you to kind of find different characteristics that might be there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I actually also have a question for Gary, if you don't mind. And that's the whole idea of sharing the stats with the team. I know you said you would go through the stats with individual members of the team, but I'm just wondering, do you share tables to see who has run the most or who has done the most sprints in the game to facilitate that bit of competition, or is that something that you might want to keep to yourself or between yourself and the player, because maybe people are just trying to get their stats up to be the top of the panel and the team, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, we would share some team data. So generally, look, I guess, Colin, you look to do it in such a way where you're not singling out the bottom end, but more so you're looking at the top end, and it's just allowing a little bit of goal setting for the guys that are looking to achieve that a little bit higher. But I've never done it in a case whereby you'd be looking at somebody at the bottom and telling them, look, on front of a whole team that isn't good enough. You would do that on an individual basis, but there would be some shared data through all the athletes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll stick with you actually, Gary, as well, if you don't mind. And I have another question for Sean on the output sports sides later on that someone has put in. In terms of different positions, Gary, how do you deal with that? Obviously, midfield would traditionally cover more ground, even though nowadays we have cornerbacks and even goalkeepers in Rory Began going up and down the field, etc. But how do you deal with different positions? Do you set out certain things that you're looking for them to hit, or does it all just depend on the strategy and how the manager wants to play?
Yeah, well, there's quite a bit of data out there now in terms of what sort of high-speed running, what sort of distance footballers and hurlers obviously would be travelling throughout a game. Obviously, typically your midfield, your 8 and 9 are covering the most ground. Wing backs, wing forwards, following that, and it's a little bit more even then across the board after that. But you know, you can certainly adapt training, obviously, for some players, and you can see back then through your data if you're hitting those objectives. I mean, your full back is going to be looking to obviously improve his top end speed, and you're able to maybe look at his training program whereby he's not having to do as many full velocity sprints. You're looking to give him more rest, more recovery throughout his specific program, and just looking to ensure that his top end speed is that little bit higher. As opposed to your 8 and 9, look, you're not going to as much focus on his absolute top end speed. He's not going to need it as much. So it can work both ways. It can work both ways. But yeah, certainly looking at individual players and positions will and can and has done in terms of dictating maybe where that player is best suited on the field.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Gary. One question for Sean there, in terms of the output sports technology. I know maybe not a lot of clubs are using the technology at the moment, but do you foresee a difference between county and club when it comes to using the technology? Obviously, county lads would be more familiar maybe with the gym, etc. Probably have done gym work for a couple of years, and you might get a few club lads that are new to it. Is there any significant differences you would consider? Because obviously a lot of clubs would be on this webinar. So is there anything? Is there any sort of considerations there?
Yeah, I think that there's the obvious, I suppose, in the sense that you have your inter-county players who are well used to doing your gym programming and doing your fitness assessments over the last number of years, and that as being part of an inter-county player's lifestyle is completely ingrained now. I think we are starting to see that a lot in the club level, and I think this is where the likes of the output system allows that to be scalable across the club. So having this within the actual club system, and not actually needing to be there for a lot of the coaches, you know, being able to access this data remotely, being able to actually program in the sessions for the athletes, allowing the athletes to go into the gym and conduct the sessions by themselves because the system is user friendly. I think it probably provides a new opportunity for the likes of those clubs to get to that next level with the objective data that they're getting fed back into their database and their system, which will then allow them to get more specific with their training and some of the adaptations that they might be chasing, you know, at different points in the season.
Thanks, Sean. Another question for you. One for you first, and then for Stat Sports, both from Kim Turner. So Kim, thanks for putting in the question. So she says she's an S&C coach, and she recently purchased an Output Sports device, so a client of yours. She wants to implement it this season. So in Barry's experience, I think we're still struggling to get Barry, but he'd be interested to know what the norms. Or you're back, Barry. Good to hear. Yeah. Kim is interested to know what sort of the norms are for female sports in different positions. So what kind of baseline should she be looking at for female sports?
Yeah, I think initially just getting in and getting some of the testing done and getting a benchmark for each of those players individually. Now Barry will probably be able to speak to this a lot better than myself, having worked with the ladies in Meath last season. But I think it's important to get a baseline for each of the players initially, and then going from there. I suppose not expecting too much too soon, but get your benchmark and then work from there. Barry, maybe you'll have something to input into that with your work last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with you in that there's not a lot of normative data in terms of some of these tests. And again, the fact that just, you know, a number of the tests are quite, I suppose, new and innovative in many ways in terms of how they're being measured by yourselves and the level of detail. It's about getting that baseline information, say at pre-season, and you kind of have something to work towards then. As we're testing and monitoring the players, you're actually gathering data all the time. So it's quite, I suppose, easy to see trends, and then obviously if there's a drop off or whatever, in terms of certain numbers, in terms be it force production, etc. You know, it can indicate maybe there's an element of fatigue there, and therefore that allows us to have a conversation to intervene, I suppose, before maybe something happens. So I suppose it depends. Coming back to the question, it depends on what exactly you're looking at in terms of what detail. But certainly for normative data, we find we're collecting that information all the time and building a profile of that particular player, which we find quite useful.
Thanks, Barry. And maybe Connor might be a good one to answer this. So Connor wants to know, when it comes to the GPS side, what's sort of the norms, or maybe what difference there might be between the male and the female? What should she be targeting for her players?
Yeah, 100%. I suppose the big thing, again, like Sean mentioned, is, you know, obviously it is the research out there is quite dominantly on the male side at the moment. But obviously what we're trying to do, and what we have over kind of 6 kind of GAA ladies sides at the moment, using our elite stuff as well as our coach series stuff. So what we're trying to do at the underage level and through the kind of ladies football and camogie as well is to start to build the database ourselves in terms of what the kind of averages are and what the norms are, because, you know, I do many demos with kind of ladies sides as well, and that's always the question that comes out in terms of, you know, what's the kind of norm and what should we be aiming for. And I think that's kind of coming down the tracks quite quickly, especially from ourselves, and you know, with kind of more and more club teams and more inter-county teams getting involved, we'll start to build the database ourselves and obviously be able to kind of communicate with our teams to kind of get their averages throughout league and championship, etc., and starting to put all that together so that we can feed that back to our customers as well.
Thanks, Connor. And maybe a question for yourself, and also for Gary. Gary, this might be an interesting one for you, actually. This question came in from Neil Delaney. So I suppose Neil is maybe talking about at club level, at county level. You probably have lads who are focused, who are diligent, who are trying to improve, etc., and they care about the stats. But maybe at club level, lads might be giving out, I forgot the system, I forgot to download things, I don't like the way the bra fits on my chest, etc. And maybe Neil says that kind of is of limited benefit if not everyone buys into it. So maybe at club level, is there any tips that you can give for lads who mightn't have that same level of focus at county level to really buy into using the system?
Yeah, I never find buy-in difficult with players in terms of anything technology related. It's more down to the club being able to afford the technology, really. I would see guys at every level being really interested in data. I think it's a male thing, whereby we like numbers, we like statistics, maybe like a bit of physics. I think it's something with the male brain, and maybe the competitiveness comes out also. But so buy-in, never really have an issue with that, is the answer, I suppose, to Neil. It's amazing, like if it's a different type of technology, but if you put out speed gates for 14-year-olds, you'll see them run harder than you've ever seen them run in their lives, because they're getting that little bit of data. 3.46 seconds, what did I get? They all want to know, as guys are just have an obsessive nature with data. It is more down to if you have the funds available to purchase, where so that sums up my that would be the summation of Neil's question, I think.
Yeah, and we'll stick with you quickly there, Gary, and then we'll go back to Barry. I have another one for Barry after. But your opinion on using GPS to replace players in the heat of a championship match, even if they're still playing well, but the GPS is telling you that their tank is empty. What is your stance on that one? How diligent are you towards the stats compared to what you see in the field?
Yeah, it's not that it's a difficult one to answer, but every circumstance is going to be different, I guess. If you've got two players who are quite fatigued, but one of them maybe has been rehabilitating recently through hamstring injury, for instance, and you're wondering which of the two you're going to take off, and maybe both have put in the same volume of work, you might veer on the side of the guy maybe returning to play, or that has returned to play recently. If both players are going well, and you're not concerned from a welfare point, or if a particular player is going well and he has got massive figures up, I'd never be one to pull him, personally, being honest. Also, there is a mental aspect to it also. Some players have an ability to go through certain barriers, and that will be seen in training sessions, and it will be seen in games. So there is an element of that to play also. I mean, Barry is probably going to, he would be maybe, there's the obvious concern of fatigue and the likelihood of certain injuries through fatigue. If there is colossal figures being put up by a particular player and a game is over, there's reason to maybe snap a player off, So it's a very individualized question, but I hope that gives a little clarity, but it's difficult.
Yeah, probably something that comes with experience as well through using the system. Yeah. That question came in from Matt at Club Forest. Thanks, Matt, for that question. And we might just do two more questions and then we might wrap up. One is for Barry. I know you had, we were going to talk on it before we had the audio issues, about the ACL rehab. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about that, how that helped on the rehab of that girl who had the ACL injury, and how it kind of helped her maybe, I don't know, just come back quicker, or how it helped there.
Yeah, so I suppose there was the challenges during lockdown in terms of not having access to the, I suppose, gym equipment, the ideal scenario in terms of from a loading perspective. And we were able to obviously use output to monitor, the metrics along the way in terms of hitting the targets and the goals that we had set out. And we're having to try and be a little bit imaginative in terms of how we are achieving that loading, by using, dumbbells and shopping bags and pulleys and different things, trying to replicate, I suppose, the gym equipment, which access wasn't there, but we were able to see that we were still hitting the targets along the way, and knew that we were obviously doing, achieving what we wanted to achieve ultimately. It also guided us, as I was saying earlier on, about the different stages of rehab in terms of the progressions, in terms of, we were able to know when it was, I suppose, safe to move on towards running, when we were safe to start pushing, change of direction, obviously looking at the mechanics as well. But again, the numbers aided us in making those decisions. It reached a point where we were aiming towards a certain deadline. We knew we had a number of weeks to try and make that. Having that information, having the numbers was a massive asset to her. It was a carrot for her in terms of, look, when we can hit these numbers, we know we'd be happy to get you back in doing some training, given that she had a number of other boxes ticked as well. So again, I keep mentioning being able to measure things. It really is a massive asset to be able to look at such detail on that. And that's, I suppose, really for her, the fact that there's an element of remote coaching there as well. And I know Sean mentioned it earlier as well, about, the players can actually use this quite easily. They have the app on their phone, and it's quite user friendly in that regard. So there's, and they're getting that immediate feedback. And just on your point earlier, I heard you were asking the question about the difference maybe between county players and club players. I find club players actually eat up the opportunity to have access to this level of information and this level of detail. And it's great for it to be accessible to the club player at grassroots level, to have that level of I suppose expert feedback. And to be measuring things that that everybody wants to be doing the same as what the elite professional sports teams are doing. So I think that's really huge, and I certainly don't find it an issue from a buy-in point of view in that regard.
Yeah, I think certainly myself as a club player, I think it's something I'd be very interested in. So maybe Neil is just stuck with a particularly unmotivated bunch of lads there, so we'll see how he gets on. But just on that one, about the measurement, Barry, do you reckon there's also a psychological element to it as well in terms of motivating you to do your rehab? Like if you tear an ACL, that's 6, 7, 9 months of hard rehab. And I know myself, when I go to physio and I get a set of exercises, I'll do it hard for a couple of weeks, but then I'll get sick of them and I'll just kind of maybe do a token effort. But if I know I'm getting measured and I'm going to get tested each time I go back to the physio, but I can't bluff it here. I have to make sure that I'm hitting these, and you'll be saying to me, you're not quite hitting where you're getting to, you're going to have a longer recovery because of this. Do you think there's that psychological element of it as well?
Absolutely. I think when you know you're going to be tested, it's like any of us, we react to that really when we know there's somebody going to be checking up on us, and as you said, there's no hiding. But on the positive side of it, definitely, I think, and there's a lot of positive reinforcement too, that when you've put the work in and you actually achieve your target, there's a lot of positive reassurance from that, and it gives them that motivation to push on then again to the next level. And as you were saying, that ACL journey, for example, it's a long 9 to 12 month journey, and particularly for a GAA player who's used to, I suppose, training or working or going to the gym in a group, they're now on their own in many respects. You can, obviously they still have quite a bit of support staff around them, but they ultimately are doing a lot of it on their own in their own time. So being able to break down the different milestones and actually being able to, rather than things being wishy-washy, we can set clear targets. They know this is, if I do put the work in and I hit this target, I get that reward and I move on. And that certainly has helped us, particularly during the lockdown as well, where, as I said, you don't necessarily have the same level of access to equipment, and access to maybe the full backroom team was a little bit more restricted than what it would have been. So yeah, I think being able to break that down, being able to measure, and being able to tick off those boxes. And just on that as well, classic one, any of the physios on the webinar this evening will completely identify with this. It's like, I'm 6 months, or I'm 8 months, or I'm 9 months, such and such a person has gone back. And it really, what I emphasize is it's about, it's performance based, it's competency based. And once we know that we're hitting the targets and the numbers, it's not about time, it's about what you can do and what you can demonstrate. And you basically want to be able to show that you have them prerequisites to be able to perform on the pitch.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Barry. We'll just have put 2 questions to maybe Connor or Gary, quickly just to finish off, folks, and then we'll leave it at that. We could probably go on talking all night. I know I certainly could anyway. It's certainly very interesting for me. We have a question from Jim Bulger, Connor, and he's asking, can the system be used on more than one team? And we also have a question from Colin McCormack. I'm not sure if I quite understand this one, but would the StatSports tracker pick up if a player is using en route back from injury with their sessions, or if the running intensity or rehab is dropped, would it show less effort is used? So I guess, does it highlight that if there's less effort used from a certain player?
Yeah, no, 100% on the first question there from Jim. I suppose there's no, again, I go back to, there's no right or wrong way to kind of use the system. We have clubs at every level that kind of use it in different ways. As I said earlier, it is quite an individual solution. So each unit kind of is linked to one player, but at the same time, it's very easy to kind of reset them, pass them to other players, use them for other teams. So 100%, that's kind of the answer to that one. And I hope that's okay with you. And then in terms of Colin, then the injury and the return to play, and Gary might jump in after me with it, but the return to play is a huge part of kind of GPS technology and the benefit of it. Obviously, it has a huge kind of effect on performance, but that load monitoring, as it is in terms of being able to kind of track somebody's average, is massively important. When you start getting an average for your player and you start getting to know their athletic profile, it's very easy then, if they unfortunately get injured, to kind of track the kind of percentage that they're at in terms of their ability to hit high speeds, their abilities to hit distance. But as well as that, we've got some kind of individual metrics like high intensity distance and step balance, etc., that are kind of key when you're looking at kind of coming back from injuries and returning to play, so that you know if a player has an ankle injury or a knee injury or whatever and they're coming back from it, the closer they get back to their average, whether that's a 50-50 step balance or a 48-52, you know, the closer they get back to that, that you can pick up on the GPS, the closer they are to kind of returning to full action.
Yeah, that's a very comprehensive answer there, Connor. Thanks very much. We're going to leave it at that, folks. It's 8:15, so I've been holding the speakers about 15 minutes longer than agreed. So thank you to all of them for hanging on. And thanks to Marty Clark, to Gary Flannery, to Connor Clancy, to Sean Mc Veigh, and to Barry McEntee. Really, Gary, you want to jump in there quickly?
Yeah, Sean, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Just an interesting conversation, just an interesting topic that was brought up in terms of ladies. Is there anything through output that measures valgus control?
Yeah, so we have a mobility module, and within that it measures any sort of kind of objective sway within the movement. So we have a free mode within that, which will allow you to basically measure the range that you get through in that exercise. So yeah, absolutely able to do that.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's my question.
I'd say these lads could go chatting on all night. So, but for everyone attending, this is something that we would like to perhaps do again. Stay tuned. We'll be keeping you informed about other stuff we'll be doing with this partnership. We will be sharing some material, some summary slides for anyone who has attended. And do remember those exclusive offers, and make sure to mention to the lads you're a Club Force club. And tell us as well, tell me if any of my clubs are listening in, if this provided value to you. That's great, because that's all we want to do here. We just want to provide more value to all our Club Force customers. And I really want to thank StatSports, Output Sports, Barry from McEntee Performance Physio, Gary as well from Roscommon Lead Performance there. So thanks to everyone. I also want on our side, I want to thank Rachel, who was instrumental on getting this webinar together and promoting it, etc. But most of all, thanks for everyone for listening in, the brave people who have tuned in. I think there's about 60 to 70 or so that have tuned into the end. So hopefully that's an indicator that there was good content there for everyone. So thanks very much, folks, and we'll be in touch soon.